running the Badlands. Explain those Badlands. That's a hell of a name.
All right, welcome to this week's Breaking History on Badlands Media, where we're very, very happy to chat about world history context. It's very rare to find people actually dealing with causality. So I'm always happy to chat with Gordon, and today we have a special guest. So Gordon, thank you once again for joining me. And I heard that you're bringing, well, right now everyone can see him, Brady Fuchs.
Yeah. Brady, welcome. It's funny. Brady and I have known each other for, I guess, about 3 years now. This is a really serendipitous moment for me because Brady's really the reason that I started streaming. He's the one, like the first person who ever got me in front of a camera and put me on like a Rumble channel. And then he also like two or 3 years ago, put me into hooked me up with you, like put you in my mind's eye. So I was like following you because of him, because y'all had done stuff before. And then when I heard that you were doing a history show on Badlands, I was like, perfect. I was like, he's the perfect guy to do this. So this is like full circle right now for me. Brady's someone I've known for a while. He used to organize these like multi-hour Zoom calls with people who were like researchers, and we just sit there for like hours and compare notes, kind of like what we do on the show. And those were like some of the most fruitful discussions and digs. And I learned so much about a lot of things just from doing that, particularly the CIA. I mean, a lot of the things that I've conveyed on the show, I've either learned directly or indirectly. Like Brady sent me down a rabbit hole, filled in gaps in my research. So it's an honor to have him here. Brady Warhamster is what he goes by on Twitter and Rumble. But Brady, welcome.
Thank you. It's great here to be with both of you. I just recently restarted my channel a couple months ago, and you guys both of you were among the first guests I ever had back when I first got started, when I was still afraid to be in front of a camera. So it is kind of serendipitous to be here again. And
I got to just say, to add to that, what was it, 2.5, 3 years ago when I first met you, Brady, as well on your program that you were co-hosting with, I forget the other fellow's name. That was one of the few times. It's very rare that I find myself in the course of an interview taking notes from the interviewer. That was one of the few times where that ever happened. So
that was that Ron Partain?
I appreciate this.
Yeah, that would have been Ron Partain. Yeah,
nice.
We used to do interviews together back in the day. In fact, actually, he brought me on his channel a couple times in the last couple of weeks. Just one was to talk about suspending the Constitution. The other one was I had just gotten through the New Hampshire primary and done the old party switch thing, and Ron wanted me to tell his audience about that. So.
Yeah, I actually talked about that on Badlands Daily. So when I was on with Patrick a few weeks ago, Brady is the person who called me and told me about. So I said I had a friend in New Hampshire who had called and given me intel on the primary. It was Brady. So he's a trustworthy source.
Cool. Anyway,
so Matt, why don't you cue us up for the subject matter today and connect it to the current events?
For sure. Well, the thing that caught my eye, a lot of my followers had sent me a link to a Tucker Carlson interview this past week, throughout this week and last week. It was with Brett Weinstein, who I generally like. Brett Weinstein and his Dark Horse podcast that he hosts with his wife. I found it to be of value during the times of the medical dictatorship insanity stuff, when it was at its peak and there's a lot of medical misinformation. So I appreciate a lot of the stuff that he brought to the discussion. But this was a weird one, and he had just returned from a journey, a guided tour of the Darien Gap. He's a biologist, a Darwinian biologist specifically, and he wanted to bring his scientific analysis to the problems of the border crisis to the audience that Tucker Carlson was happy to provide to him. And I was a little bit disturbed by the level of you'd expect from a scientist, a little bit more rigor in what they're saying, but there was a lot of gossip, a lot of conjecture built upon conjecture with innuendo that is designed to inflame people's fear and emotion and if it's going to be something so serious as the Chinese CPC are, we already know that the Five Eyes, CIA, FBI, CSIS are all pushing the program to weaponize the psyche of the Western population to be afraid of China. They already had emergency meetings with Christopher Wray and others overseeing the need to focus on the oncoming confrontation with China. There's a military encirclement. There's all of this stuff. you'd think you'd be a bit more careful with your words. But instead, no, there was just a lot of innuendo that the border crisis is tied to Chinese mercenaries who have been brought in working with Biden to be a part of his secret CPC army to, attack patriots, and are directing immigrants to flood in. And with those immigrants, there's allusions to Chinese military-age men, always military-age men, infiltrating in through the borders, not Chinese construction workers or Chinese, because there's $400 billion worth of economic deals with 26 Latin American and Caribbean countries and China to build massive infrastructure. So ignore all of that. It's just military age men are there. The BRI is out to destroy America and take over as the new global empire, and all of these illusions. And again, it was really disappointing because I know that they're really pushing hard right now, the narrative managers at, like we discussed last week, inducing the U.S. into a new civil war. We got, people who are Robert Mueller appointees writing letters to the governors of the red states, and are being celebrated as American patriots. These are like FBI assistant directors, appointees by Robert Mueller, who have written this letter that's pouring this fuel on the fire as well, about terrorists being infiltrated from the Mexican border. So all that to say, there's so many layers of fallacy that it was frustrating to listen to. And the real issues of Latin America, the problems of why there's even people who've been wanting to leave their countries, from El Salvador and Guatemala and Mexico and all these things. Why have they wanted to leave for decades to come to the USA? There's so little awareness or understanding of the multi-centennial hidden hands of empire that we have participated in many ways in the West. This IMF, Wall Street, CIA, United Fruit thing that's overthrown governments and across all Latin American countries, killed people, overseen mass slaughters of innocent people, all of this stuff. There's so little awareness of this. We're not taught about this in our school system in Canada or the United States. So Brady, I'm so happy, Brady, that you and Gordon decided to kick in, because I know, Brady, you've done an immense amount of work on United Fruit, on the deep history of deep politics in terms of the problems of Latin America, and can really bring some important context to what's really at the heart of the ills of Latin America. So thank you.
And that's such a great point. I'm about to pass it on to Brady and just let him run, because he's going to give us so much information. And I mentioned this on Monday about United Fruit. This kind of topic came up on Badlands Daily, and I said we should really do United Fruit on breaking history. And Brady is just the guy when it comes to United Fruit. I mean, he's mentioned that subject to me so many times. I may have put a misnomer today when I promoted the show, because I said that United Fruit is the most notorious CIA front. A lot of people said I've never even heard, knew that Chiquita is not what they go by now, but I didn't even know that they were a CIA front. That's probably true. I didn't either, not until Brady told me. But they are a very, very well-known company, and so we're going to see how they actually are connected. And the great point that you made about these military-age men coming into the country. Last year, they were kind of seeding this idea about a secret Chinese army, right? Now they're kind of seeding the idea of radical Islamic terrorists coming in through the southern border. Well, if these terrorist attacks start happening around America, you know that our government is in on it. And this will be probably one of the most glaring proofs that these Islamic terrorist groups are actually being run by our government, because they are obviously allowing them to come into our country. So if they start attacking our infrastructure, our people, whatever, here on the homeland, you know that our government's part of it. And it just proves everything that we've been saying on the show, that, this isn't the Middle East coming after us. This is America weaponizing the Middle East against us. And the reason they would be doing that is to promote warfare, like the mindset of America going to war with the Middle East, which is, of course, what they want right now. So with that said, I'll pass it over to Brady. Tell us all about United Fruit.
You guys have teed me up very nicely. The story that all of us have been telling, and I watch a lot of you guys' content because it's good. So I'm pretty much familiar with everything you guys have been talking about, which makes my job as your guest a lot easier. But the big story is, who really runs the world? And it's this multinational syndicate of multinational corporations, the government, whether it be the Anglo-American Alliance, our State Department diplomacy, and our intelligence agencies all working together. And two of those three, it's fine for a corporation to work for its own profit, but when the government starts getting involved in that, we've got a word for that, and it's called fascism. And what we're facing is international fascism, and it goes back a very long time. So we're going to talk about United Fruit Company and their connection there. And first person I want to introduce you to is someone who history is mostly forgotten about, by a gentleman by the name of Minor Cooper Keith. And this is where the origins of the banana trade comes from. He moved to Costa Rica to work on his uncle's railroads in the 1880s. By the age of 23, he was running, his uncle had ceded him the business. He's 23 years old. In 1882, Costa Rica would default on their payments to the railroad company. So Keith would go out there and raise 1.2 billion pounds from British banks. And you guys can guess which banks those might have been. He completes his railroad in Costa Rica in 1890, but there's not enough passengers and cargo to service the debt. They built the railroad. If you build it, they will come. Well, didn't quite work out. So Keith has got to find a way to support his railroad service. And he's gotten sweetheart deals from the Costa Rican government and all that, but still, you got to pay off that 1.2 million pounds. So to support the debt, he gets into the banana trade. And it's interesting, bananas aren't even indigenous to the Western Hemisphere. So he'd been experimenting with planting bananas since like 1873 and finally got them to work in Central America and in the Caribbean.
1873, there's that date again. I just got to point that out, but continue, please.
So to market the bananas, it's got to, once you grow your bananas, you got to get them to the American market. So he begins running a steamboat line into New Orleans. So it's interesting is you got to produce, they're building a stranglehold on not only transportation, rail and ship, but also the product themselves. He ends up establishing a company called Tropical Trading and Transport Company, and partners with a guy by the name of M.T. Snyder to establish banana plantations in Panama and Colombia. And they created let's see, I do not have the name of their fruit company. We'll get to that in a second. But that's the pioneer of the banana trade. It was Minor Cooper Keith. And by the 1890s, they're dominating the banana trade in Central America and Colombia. And this is big business. Bananas became the second biggest crop in America very quickly, or the second biggest food that was eaten.
Is it the Boston Fruit Company?
They jump into here very shortly.
Okay,
that's the next chapter.
Gotcha.
So now I want to just take a little sidestep because it's important and talk about how our corporations and corporate interests run our foreign policy and our diplomacy. And this is a really great example. A gentleman by the name of Mark Hanna. Are you guys familiar with him?
Mark Hanna.
He was a kingmaker back in the day, right? A rich guy.
That's the one, Matt. Great. Yeah. I thought you might get that one. So Mark Hanna is a millionaire, and he grew up in Ohio. He had an interesting schoolmate that he became lifelong friends with. You guys probably heard of him named John D. Rockefeller. So they were friends from teenage years. Hanna gets expelled from college, serves briefly in the Civil War, and he's got a couple failed businesses in the petroleum industry. So he's in his, I believe, early 30s at this point, and he marries a distant relative of Stephen Douglas, Lincoln's old opponent, and it would eventually take over their family business. Now it was coal and steel, a lot of railroad dealings. We're in the robber baron days, and you remember Pennsylvania Railroad from Monopoly? That was he was the big supplier for that. So jumping into what Matt said, he decides to become a kingmaker. He's made his millions. He wants to become a kingmaker in the Republican Party. So twice he tries to push a senator by the name of John Sherman for presidential bids in 1884 and 1888. And both of them failed, but he got himself a heck of a reputation. He was a good deal maker and all that. Becomes chair of the Republican National Committee. And then in 1896, Mark Hanna handpicks William McKinley to run for president. Well, William McKinley would end up being the most business-friendly president in history. Whatever the multinational corporations wanted, they got under him. Hanna would buy up a bunch of newspapers, requires them to write articles praising McKinley, and McKinley ends up beating William Jennings Bryan 51-47 in the 1896 election. So now McKinley's president. Senator John Sherman, who's still one of Hanna's in his circles, gets named as the Secretary of State. Now, this creates a void in the U.S. Senate, which Mark Hanna steps right into as a U.S. Senator. So he's got an amazing amount of control on U.S. foreign policy. This one guy, Mark Hanna. The Spanish-American War breaks out 2 years later, destabilizes the entire South and Central American region. And, of course, our friends Sullivan and Cromwell were on the ground in advance of all of that. I'll pause there for a comment because there's some names there that you guys probably want to have a little fun with.
Yes, playing the guessing game again. Is it the Tropical Trading and Transport Company? That was the company you were looking for earlier.
Yeah, that's one of the two. He had a fruit company, had a transport company.
Awesome. Okay, yeah, I found their website. This is as you're talking, I'm taking the names down, and I'm just quickly seeing if there's anything what comes up when I look them up. But man, you've hit on a lot of things already on subjects that we've covered on this show. 1873 is obviously the year that the East India Company was officially abolished. That was the year 1873, 1874, when British intelligence was formally started by the War Office in Britain. So yeah, I mean, and then obviously Oliver Sullivan and Cromwell. That's a law firm that we've talked about a lot because that's the law firm that basically became the CIA, as Brady taught to me long ago. So so many names here that are coming up.
Yeah, that's really important. Brady, I don't know if you want to respond to that, but I also want to add a thought to share, an observation as well.
Yeah, real quick, just on the Sullivan Cromwell. Okay. What we found is that the United States did not have intelligence in non-wartime period prior to post-World War II, and so the activities that intelligence agencies would normally perform were done by law firms, and that's why I bring in Sullivan and Cromwell. They would go out there and speak to people in dark places and lay the ground for future invasions or whatever dirty work the United States had to do. These were law firms that did it, and Sullivan and Cromwell were the kings of that.
Yeah, and just to put a bow on that, Sullivan and Cromwell, remember everybody, that was the law firm that those guys, the Dulles brothers, were at the Treaty of Versailles in 1919, and they helped negotiate the resolution at the end of World War I, which ultimately helped establish the boundary lines of the Middle East that were favorable to England and France. And basically set up the game board, the chessboard for what we're dealing with right now in the Middle East. So Sullivan and Cromwell was at the heart of that entire nefarious event.
Yeah. I don't want to. Just to add like a little bit of coloring to this. There's one thing that I'm always thinking about as you're speaking is the effort. Last week we touched on this question of like. The historic roots of domestic terrorism as part of an asset of intelligence agencies going through the KKK, run by Albert Pike and the Scottish Rite. And there's something that I've been looking at regarding the research by Anton Chaikin, a really wonderful EIR historian. And he was going through this, the pre-KKK incarnation was this very, very gigantic private sort of shadow government army in America that was set up in the 1850s called the Knights of the Golden Circle. And one of the key figures within that was a slave power privateer named William Walker. And you guys heard about the case of William Walker. There's actually a movie that kind of does a little bit of a jab on this, really well done, called Quemada Burn with Marlon Brando from 1969. Fantastic movie going through the William Walker story, but with a bit of a twist. So William Walker, he basically takes control of Nicaragua in 1853. Within 2 seconds is recognized by, I guess it's the Pierce administration, who just immediately recognizes him as the president of Nicaragua. He stays president for 10 months, and he has this whole plan to annex all of the adjacent countries increasingly as part of the slave power, to make them slave states under the control of the whole Pike apparatus, which is itself run by Mazzini and Palmerston abroad as sort of a Young America South operation from the Freemasonic groups. That doesn't work ultimately. It's only 10 months in, it fails. But the idea was to create an empire with Cuba as the center of the empire. And this whole circle is like imagine a compass being drawn with Cuba as the center of the compass, featuring like half of America, most like all of Central America, a big chunk of like all of Mexico, big chunk of of South America. And that was going to be the center of a new empire that would then just expand, but as a proxy empire, kind of like a Persia was to Babylon, or the USA post 1945 was to Britain. That doesn't work. And so it's interesting to see them like basically recalibrate and reattempt their efforts to create this like oligarchical slave empire over central, like all of Latin America once again, after Lincoln's murdered and other patriots are murdered in the late 19th century. So what you're saying right now, I've got all that in my mind as far as like a rebranding, a reorganization, subvert Reconstruction, make sure you can get your unreconstructed assets back into positions of power and do it all over again. But now with like, Sullivan, Cromwell, with this new agency of corporate power that's now being deployed to do the same thing with a new flavor.
And quick thought on that, because this has to do with the research that I'm doing right now in the Substack article I'm about to put out, is the idea of empires, which began really with the Age of Discovery, the global empire with maritime trade. Portugal in the 1400s, Spain in the 1500s, England really started in the 1600s. France was in there, like in the 1700s was England and France. 1800s is when it started to shift to America. 1900s just became full-blown America, and all of those, like that entire process, all of the wealth or most of the wealth, a lot of it that came from India and China and Japan, but all that gold, all that silver came from South America and Central America, Peru and Mexico. The silver in Peru, there's a mountain. 1 out of every 4 pieces of silver in the world comes from this mountain in Peru. Really? And then the gold in Mexico. And basically the Portuguese and the Spanish were shipping the ships back, or sending these treasure galleons back to Europe. And then England, France, Netherlands, all these other countries are hiring pirates or turning their naval captains into pirates to attack the ships and steal the gold. And it's a fascinating history. That's what I did my thesis on as an undergrad. But anyway, so Central America, South America are really at the heart of a lot of this global metal wealth, like gold and silver, et cetera.
Yeah, we could talk pirates quite a bit. I've been doing a lot of research on that lately, just because of where I'm living right now, colonial New England. It's I've gotten into looking at some of the old ship stuff, so it's a fun story. The difference between a pirate and a privateer is a piece of paper. It's a piece of paper.
A piece of paper from the government. Yeah. And Captain Morgan, the spiced rum guy, he was the governor of Jamaica, appointed by Britain to be the governor of Jamaica, and he was like a huge pirate lord. I mean, he was like a pirate king, basically. So there's some fascinating anecdotes we don't have to talk about now about that. But anyway, I digress.
Should I jump back into United Fruit?
Let's do it.
All right. We're up to 1899, and Minor Cooper Keith, the Banana King, he's got a financial setback, and it forces him to merge with Andrew Preston's Boston Fruit Company, who Gordon brought up earlier. And the Boston Fruit Company was dominating the trade in the West Indies, that part of the Caribbean. So this creates United Fruit Company. They've got a stranglehold on all the shipping in the region. It'll become known as, the nickname was El Popo, which means the octopus. They had their finger in the pies, owning land, involved in governments with every one of these South and Central American regimes in that area, in the trade routes. Cheap land and labor, which they needed, they were assured just by propping up oppressive regimes. And that's where we really got the Banana Republic, the Tin Pot Dictator. That's where the name came from. They would eventually United Fruit Company would own over 3 million acres of land in these other countries. They'd employ their own private spy network. A few years later, they'd employ their own radio networks to ensure logistical efficiency, and they were used for propaganda. Again, they were involved in the politics locally. Peak of their influence was around 1900 and 1910, and that's where things get really interesting in that period of time. A couple other things to know about the early days of United Fruit. They had cutting-edge technology in shipping. Here's where it gets interesting: genetic modification and public relations propaganda. That's where genetic modification and public relations propaganda began. Interestingly enough, a giant plague, a lot of bananas were dying, took place about 3 or 4 years after the genetic modification started.
What year was this?
That would have been 1907, 1908.
Okay. And the entity behind, I'm sorry, I didn't catch the entity behind
That was United Fruit.
So United Fruit was actually the one who started doing what you just described, genetic modification and the PR spinning. Interesting.
Yeah, because, well, that's a lot of the worst things our government has been doing ever since. Another real important.
Were they doing that on all of their products, or focusing on bananas? Like they were splicing. I didn't know that they had the capability of splicing genetic material and to induce certain attributes or traits to emerge in a seed crop or something. What were they? Do you know what they were doing?
No, I don't. I don't have the detail. I don't have the details on that. I just took the headline of genetic modification, but they were trying to change their bananas to grow more efficiently in a different climate, what have you, messing with the natural banana. I'm sure it was not genetic splicing, but we can get more detail. I can dig into that. I got the article around here somewhere.
Okay, cool. Yeah.
Another important development, of course, is the Panama Canal. A lot of people had a vested interest in connecting the Pacific and Atlantic Oceans. A lot of people in Europe had an interest. Business companies, shipping companies had interests, and of course, the militaries had a real big interest. So France, they started. The Europeans were looking at doing a Nicaraguan canal, and that was possible. But Panama seemed to be was the shorter distance between 2 points. France had started the Panama Canal, digging that in 1881, but they only got about 40% of the way done. It was halted in 1888 after about 30,000 worker deaths, and the company was insolvent. Enter the United States, representing their business interests. This has in United Fruit's part of this the entire time. They decided they're going to take over the French rights to build a canal, but they still needed Colombia's permission because it was that Panama was Colombia at the time.
Hey Matt, I'm going to share my screen if you don't mind.
Oh yeah, sure.
This is a map that I found that says it's a United Fruit map that has to do with the United Fruit. So just keep speaking, Brady. Panama City, this little line right here, that's the Panama Canal.
So outstanding, good find.
Yep. So keep going.
Okay, so we're into the picture. Sullivan and Cromwell show up again. What Cromwell was doing was on the ground in what became known as Panama. He was agitating the locals to orchestrate a coup against Colombia. That doesn't take too long. That's 1903. Panama is annexed. Almost a bloodless coup occurred, mostly because the U.S. Navy showed up and stationed their ships offshore. The United States starts working on the Panama Canal again in 1904, and it's completed 10 years later, connecting the oceans. This is a boon for the shipping companies like United Fruit. A couple other interesting things. This one will be really. I know you guys have talked about this one on your show. We talked about all the turmoil after the Spanish-American War. We're propping up tin pot dictators. Well, Nicaragua nearby breaks out in a civil war in 1911. And the U.S., of course, sends in a bunch of Marines under the direction of Major General Smedley Butler from War as a Racket. His orders is not to protect the government that's friendly to the U.S., but to secure the railroad lines and protect the trade so that the Civil War doesn't get in the way of profit. And famous occasion there, he drove a train right through about 150 rebel soldiers to protect the shipment. Those were his orders. Now, I know Major General Smedley Butler is near and dear to Matt's heart because you speak about him quite a bit.
Yep.
And I don't know, I pulled up, I think I have his quotes, but basically when he got retired and realized what was going on, he told Congress and America that he'd been a mercenary for corporate interests the entire time. 30-something years of service. And what is he, the most decorated Marine of all time?
Yep. A real patriot, too, because he could have gone along with the business plot, but he didn't. 1933. So, but yeah, I wanted to share this map real quick and just kind of explain to people the significance of the Panama Canal, which was man-made. So it did not exist until it was made in, what year was that? 1908, I think. Fact check that for me real quick, if you don't mind. The year the Panama Canal was dug.
Completed in 1914.
1914. Okay. So Peru, right here, the mountain that I talked about, that was silver. The Spanish actually made an entire fleet, an entire armada just to take the silver from Peru to Panama, where they would then put it on the backs of donkeys, walk it across Panama right here. And that walk across Panama was considered the most dangerous part of the entire trip from Peru to Europe because it was so deadly. Mudslides, bugs, animals, natives, like all that stuff. Lots and lots of people just died trying to cross the Panama with like all this silver loaded up on these donkeys. So the Panama Canal was a huge deal. And then, you had Mexico, they were shipping gold from Mexico. So they would either come through here and through the Bahamas to go to Europe, or they'd come through across Panama and go through here past the Haiti and Dominican Republic, which is why these islands in the Caribbean, like Pirates of the Caribbean, that's why that became a thing. These pirates, these privateers most of them worked for European countries, European governments, would hide out on these islands, wait for the treasure ships to come by, and then jump them, ambush them, and what have you. So just wanted to kind of point out the historical significance there, and it's all connected to the idea of global empire.
Yeah, and you could really appreciate the strategic role of having Cuba, right, as a controlling center as well, which is why Mayor Lansky and all of the CIA, like the entire apparatus, wanted it so badly and had total control before, throughout all the way up until the late 50s. It was completely dominated, but that was why the KKK operatives back in the 19th century were also like salivating over that. But let's quickly just look at a couple of ads, and then we'll jump back into Brady's briefing. So the first one is Frequency Apps, which our lives are easy because it's a fully audio-visual commercial.
Imagine a future where your body can restore, revive, and rejuvenate itself effortlessly. Frequency Apps harness the power of specific frequencies to create patches that are changing the game. These patches are easy to use with no interactions and no side effects, making them highly convenient. Every set of frequencies is designed to enhance and naturally stimulate specific systems within your body. Once applied, these frequency apps emit targeted frequencies that communicate with your body, helping it awaken its natural responses without any side effects. With over 50 different frequency apps, each one is a masterpiece of subharmonic frequencies carefully embedded to perfection. Ready to take the leap into the future of homeopathy? This America First company is offering Badlands viewers up to 25% off when purchasing a monthly subscription. Visit badlandsmedia.tv/patches and use code BADLANDS at checkout to enjoy an exclusive 5% discount, or subscribe and save up to 25%. That's badlandsmedia.tv/patches using promo code BADLANDS.
Interesting. Okay, now we got Goldco.
All right. So Trump has been mentioning CBDCs in his recent speeches. Up until now, the digital dollar, or CBDC, has been nothing but a headline. But right now, things are developing at a rapid pace. It started with a sweeping executive order from the Biden administration, and now central banks are even hiring for their development. Here's the thing. A digital dollar can be used to track your purchases, control what you buy, and even seize or freeze your assets. That's why it's critical you protect your money with precious metals like gold and silver. We've partnered with the top-rated precious metals company, Goldco, because they're a great company with an amazing reputation. Right now, they're giving you up to $10,000 in free silver while supplies last. Plus, all qualified callers this week will receive a free Ronald Reagan silver coin. Don't wait until all of your money is under Biden's control. Go to badlandsgold.com to learn how you can get started today. That's badlandsgold.com.
Great.
I apologize if you're hearing that dinging.
Oh, yeah,
I like the dinging. I don't
I
mind.
do not know how to mute my text or to turn it off. Maybe I should just shut it off while I'm doing the show. So I jump back in?
Yeah. So
Yeah.
we were talking. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but yeah, keep going.
No, we just ended. That was an example of how United Fruit, wielded so much power that you had the U.S. military working on their behalf to put install whoever they wanted into these government positions for the sole purpose of getting them cheap land and labor. That's really what it was. So at this point, we're already thinking United Fruit's kind of bad actors and has way too much power. But the real villain hasn't entered the stage yet, who really took him to the next level. And that's a gentleman by the name of Samuel Z. Murray. I think that's pronounced. It's Zemurray. So I'm going to say it's Zemurray, and be corrected later if that's all right.
Zemurray. Yeah, I think you're right.
Yeah, Zemurray, something like that. Anyway, Samuel Zemurray. He's a Russian immigrant to America in 1893. I think he was a teenager at the time. In 1905, he acquires a steamship company and with something called the Cuyamel Fruit Company.
Hey, Matt, can you share my screen? Sorry.
Yep.
Oh, yeah.
Now he's working out of New Orleans at the time, and he's got contracts with United Fruit. He's increasing his business efficiency through bribery and special deals with the Honduran government. I've spent a lot of time in Honduras scuba diving, and every single person there knows these stories. You know, how the CIA is involved in it. But you know, they're taught this from their parents and in schools. They know who Zemurray is. Everyone down there. So in 1910, Honduras is trying to reschedule their sovereign debt, and they're negotiating with American Secretary of State Philander Knox, who's famous for a lot of reasons. Knox's proposal would have had bankers from J.P. Morgan sitting at Honduran customs offices and collecting the taxes directly to go to the bank, and the government would never touch it. That was Philander Knox's proposal, of course, working with J.P. Morgan, most powerful banker at the time. So Zemurray, who had a bunch of Honduran banana interests, saw this as a threat, and he was warned by Knox not to interfere. He does interfere. Zemurray recruits a mercenary named Lee Christmas and about 100 other mercenaries, and they sail to Honduras on a ship they bought from the Navy, and they got a bunch of soldiers from the local population, probably bribed by the companies like United Fruit, and they overthrew Honduran President Miguel Davila and installed a former president named Manuel Bonilla, who'd been living in New Orleans. Zemurray, of course, as a reward, would be given favorable tax and land concessions. So we've got another Banana Republic coup done. The U.S. military stayed out of it altogether. They just they sat there offshore, and the Navy watched it happen. A number of years later, Zemurray would sell Cuyamel to his former competitor, United Fruit, in 1929 for $31.5 million in stock, which, of course, was a lot of money right there. And he did it right before the crash of 1929. So he had really good timing.
Whew.
As part of the deal, Zemurray agrees to retire from the banana business. United Fruit did not want their former competitor to build up another company. Fast forward a few years, we've got the Great Depression. United Fruit's business has declined, and Zemurray, who's still a shareholder of United Fruit, because a lot of that $31.5 million was in stock, he thought he could handle the business better post-depression. So he writes UFC, United Fruit Company's board of directors, a letter, says, "Let me take over," and he gets rejected. So he goes out and around the country and he visits a bunch of shareholders and collects proxy votes. This includes the DuPont family. And they stage a hostile takeover the next board meeting, and Zemurray would guide United Fruit from I think it was 1933 or 34 onward until he retired a little bit later. Shall I continue?
Please, please.
All right. So one of the next coups that's performed by our good friends at United Fruit Company is it's not a coup, but it's a big incident called the Colombian Massacre of 1928. And what happened is the workers in all these banana plantations were obviously underpaid and given really long, they were 7-day weeks. These people were picketing for a 6-day week. Very greedy of them. Well, the Colombian federal troops weren't having that. And on behalf of the United Fruit, they massacred hundreds of these protesters who wanted labor rights. This is done with full support of the U.S. State Department, as a U.S. Marine frigate sat there and observed this massacre from the harbor and did not intervene. Next fun thing that happens with United Fruit is they have a lawyer by the name of, they hire a lawyer we've all heard of named John Foster Dulles. So the brother of the guy who would a decade later start the CIA or found the CIA is now the lawyer for United Fruit Company, one of the most powerful multinational corporations in the world. Funny how that works.
Interesting. Yeah. That's yeah. I mean, there's no coincidences here, but no surprise. But yes. So, and by the way, this brother was also at the Treaty of Versailles. He was part of that whole situation. Connected to the Nazi regime. help launder money to them with using Prescott Bush. So fascinating.
Yeah, I am reading a great book called The Old Boys by what is this guy's name? Bernard. It's right over there. Let me see this thing. By Burton Hirsch. Highly recommend it. I'm halfway through, but it really goes into the Dulles brothers in their younger years and what they were doing at the Treaty of Versailles, and it gives you a real interesting look into their psyche. So I'm not finished with it yet, but so far it's been a fantastic read.
I'm gonna have to pick your brain when you're done with that.
Yeah, I might do like a book review on that one and bring you on as a guest.
Let's do it, man. For sure.
See if I can ever find enough free time to do an hour a day. When you're doing something like that, you got to stay fresh, but we'll get there.
Yeah, for sure.
So with Foster Dulles on board, the cocaine trade starts from Central America to the United States starts in the 1930s. No, it did not start in the 1980s. It was well before that. United Fruit Company was helping the Honduran president, Tiburcio Carillas Andino, gain power. And he was a cocaine lord. And of course, the cocaine trade, United Fruit Company would be involved in the cocaine trade into the 1980s. Now, remember, they've got all these steamships. They've got a monopoly on the entire supply chain. They grow the bananas, they ship the bananas, and they probably have quite a few contacts at the ports of entry. So it is a perfect setup to get cocaine into the country.
And I'm sorry, and what year are we right here?
We're in the 1930s when this started.
Okay. Yes, we're not even at the 40s yet, when the CIA gets going. But okay, great.
No, it predates the CIA, and we're going to get there. Interestingly enough, the bad publicity from the cocaine from the United Fruit Company, that's what caused it to change its name to Chiquita Brands in 1984. Because of that. Of course, Chiquita would stay in the business. I'll fast forward because while we're on the cocaine topic. It was 97. More than a ton of cocaine was seized from 7 Chiquita ships. Of course, the government doesn't blame them. They just called it lax security. And then, of course, Chiquita was funding the UAC, which is a terrorist organization. They were actually shipping weapons to. This ties into Iran-Contra, which is involved. And between 97 and 94, Chiquita would pay a $1.7 million fine. They paid over $1.7 million to protect their farming region. This is a terrorist organization. Got caught by the U.S. government. It got a slap on the wrist, got a $25 million fine. And it was revealed during the investigation that FARC, which is a Colombian terrorist group, they've been working with Chiquita for years. Now, the last bit on Chiquita that's fun from that period of time is one of their major attorney at the time, Barack Obama's former Attorney General, Eric Holder.
Small world.
Very small world.
Thought you might like that one.
Oh, yeah.
All right, going back in time. Let's get to the CIA part. Let's jump into the Guatemalan coup.
Yes, perfect.
So Guatemala's democratically elected governor is Colonel Jacobo Arbenz. He intended to expropriate some of United Fruit's unused lands and redistribute it to local peasants. At the time, what United Fruit would do is they'd buy up massive swaths of land. They wouldn't use it all; they just leave it untended. When they've been planting bananas on the acreage next to it, and it would finally need some time out. I guess apparently you need a rest period every few years with banana land. Then they go back and use this unused land. So they own all the land, and the peasants don't own anything. And of course, the president of Guatemala didn't think this was fair. So in 1953, Zemure, he's working with the U.S. State Department. He employs a gentleman by the name of Edward Bernays, who we know as the father of American propaganda. He launches a propaganda campaign of fear porn in America. It says that they start talking about Guatemala is going to become a Soviet satellite. And they started saying, oh, it's the domino theory. And that basically gives the political cover for the CIA to orchestrate a coup and installs a military junta led by Colonel Carlos Castilla Armas. And that was probably the CIA's first actual coup in Central America.
Yes. Yep. And actually, there are sources that try to claim that this was the first coup the CIA ever was involved in. But obviously, we now know because in 2017, they fully declassified it. 1953, the year before this, Iran they did a coup here. And it's interesting how these two places, Central America and Iran, come full circle and connect with Iran-Contra.
Mm.
Yeah, because this does lead into Iran-Contra, and this stuff has never really changed. I mean, Chiquita is not as powerful as United Foods used to be, but they're not as monopolistic. This is really this story I was going to tell is about the monopolistic power. But now we're in the 1950s, which leads us to all kinds of fun things. Matt talked about Cuba. Well, Cuba's fascinating because it was the hub of where the opium trade was coming through to get to America. And there's a reason the CIA, was willing to take on the president of the United States over the Bay of Pigs. They needed that base back. It was costing them a lot of money.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's it's fascinating that United Fruit was basically doing a lot of this stuff that we associate with the CIA now before the CIA was even around. They're working with characters who were founders of the CIA. They're orchestrating coups. I mean, they're involved in this coup in 1954 in Guatemala. So I mean, it's all right there. I mean, it's right there for you just to see. And it's fascinating that you can really provide a specific anecdote of what we're talking about.
Yeah, and one thing I was noticing too in some of my research on this topic is that Zemire and became also, so this ties in also the early days of Israel as well, because he's brought in by Edmund de Rothschild onto the board of directors of the Palestinian Economic Commission, and so he's actually using his assets in Nicaragua especially to provide conduits for supplying arms to the Irgun, the Haganah, like all of these terrorist groups run by Jabotinsky that are part of just burning the Middle East and just completely reorganizing the chessboard. He's doing that and getting sweet deals as well after 1967, or at least the apparatus that he created with this whole relationship with the Zionist faction, or the worst elements of the Zionist faction of these terrorists, are then doing deals with Nicaragua under what's his name? President Somoza, Anastasio, who's this dictator from 1967 to 79. Overthrown by the Sandinistas later on, but has this weird relationship, kind of very similar, that involves a lot of drugs, illegal arms shipments in and out of Latin America, and it very much overlaps the Iran-Contra operation as well in so many ways. It's a fascinating topic. I haven't seen anybody really address it in a satisfying way yet, though.
That's interesting. I have to now run this name Zemire through the John Sigalob Western Goals Foundation dig that I've done that we need to cover on this show soon. But basically, that's like once Iran-Contra got shut down because it was exposed, Congress shut down the funding. They then turned to this guy who has this NGO that is orchestrating, facilitating, organizing Christian charities. Like the 700 Club, Pat Robertson, raising money as a televangelist. Give us your money so we can go feed the starving children in Africa. And that money was actually being used to fund Iran-Contra and the things that Brady's describing here in Central America, South America, Iran, Israel, like all this stuff is being done with televangelist money being raised on television. Yeah,
and the fun part about this is we mentioned earlier that United Fruit Company owns great swaths of land throughout Central America. Well, the CIA had to have bases. Where do you think they were? Yeah, and where these the people like the Contras and other paramilitary organizations, they would have a nice free host of land. So that's a huge part of it. And of course, when you've got a monopoly on the shipping in an area, it makes it very easy to smuggle things like guns into and out of an area.
Absolutely, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Matt. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to add one other element too that was added to this mix after early 70s was the ecological operation that had already been sort of like taking areas out of development in North America since Teddy Roosevelt. This whole complex started getting off the ground, but it took on a new timber, right? After the World Wildlife Fund was created and the Maurice Strong apparatus at the UN. And they started putting big, giant protective parks all over Central and South America. And if you look at a map of where are all of the headquarters of like the FARC guerrillas, where do they do their training, their drug running? It's all of these perfectly protected zones. They do the same thing for Africa too, which also intersects with exactly what Brady is talking about and mapping out here. It's the CIA protected zones for the terrorists to have total safe haven, untouched by, civilization trying to develop, roads or rail or cities, because you're not allowed. It's protected biodiversity lands, which is, I think, also part of like why, Eric Weinstein also had a weird fetish regarding this perfect area around the Darien Gap. That's kind of like a mecca for ecologists. That should just be, it's like a sacred land that should never be touched by the human, concrete or development. And it almost like it hurts an ecologist who believes in the sacredness of like pristine perfection of no change of nature. There's this whole religion around it where any type of human activity becomes evil and must be stopped to protect Gaia. So there's this other factor also floating around the psyche of what was built up since the 70s.
Yeah, you really can't have a conversation about the multinational criminal syndicate, whatever word we're using to describe this giant cartel, without talking about the NGOs. And that's one of the things I used to love research. Gordon and I used to have fun digging into the NGOs, follow the money and who actually funds them. And you start digging through those things, and same kind of names keep popping up over and over again.
Yeah, you just mentioned the World Wildlife Fund. There was a person in our little group that we had where we do these Zoom calls who was deep into that. And these were people, like, we had like 3 people in that group that were like in their mid-20s, like young people who were like really into this stuff. And and they were really into the World Wildlife Fund. So that's another one. Maybe we need to do another show on the World Wildlife Fund at some point.
Yeah.
But,
I would love to. I'd love to be invited to do that. I've just started doing that research, and there's a lot to it.
Yes.
Cool.
I mean, what? Because otherwise, I would just call you, Brady, and be like, "All right, Brady, like, educate me on this," and then regurgitate it. It's like, you might as well. Why go buy the pasteurized dead milk from the store when I can just bring you the hamster and you can just suckle at the hamster's teat and get the raw milk right here, right?
Yeah, that's good. Before we go on, well, no, you just teed something else up. Matt mentioned Maurice Strong, and for those who don't know, this is the guy who really started the climate change alarmism for the United Nations in 1971 or 72. It has to be said that Maurice Strong was a Rockefeller stooge. That's who put him in place. This guy made his money in oil and gas, and now he's telling the rest of us that we're going to run out of oil and gas. It doesn't really fit. Maurice Strong is an interesting character, but more importantly, they do a lot of these things, these NGOs and government, and they do it under the guise of a climate alarmism. They make everyone feel good. You're protecting the planet while we're running guns and weapons in these protected areas. They always hide it behind the guise of some kind of social ecological good, and that's been going on since the 1970s.
Fascinating. Should we let's go ahead and hit the next ad break. Everyone, please, if you're enjoying this show, please hit the thumbs up. Let's get the show with Warhamps with Brady on here, our top show with in terms of engagement and thumbs up. That's how we track this stuff. So thank you for watching. And with that said, let's do some ads.
All right. Arrow tags. So, tired of the endless cycle of buying and tossing those paper air tree fresheners? Enter Arrow tags with where their dream was to craft a solution to this very problem. Arrow tags are the first ever laser engraved rescentable car air fresheners made right here in the USA. Born in the makerspace of Cleveland Public Library, Arrow tags is not just a business, it's a revolution, a testament to the American dream. They are not just about freshening your space, but about doing it better, with a commitment to longevity, aesthetics, and sustainability. Arrow tags are designed to last longer, look great, and reduce waste, replacing those fleeting scents with something you can count on. Don't forget to grab your Badlands Media Arrow tag, now available. Visit badlandsmedia.tv/arrowtags, AROTAGS, and use promo code BADLANDS for 10% off your offer. That's badlandsmedia.tv/arrowtags, promo codes BADLANDS. All right, next one, Badlands Shop. So you've heard the chatter, but have you checked it out for yourself? Welcome to the Badlands Media Shop, where we've partnered with Patriot companies to offer products for just about every category of life. Browse the virtual shopping aisles and rest assured that your purchases align with your values. Shop with peace of mind, avoiding woke companies with woke principles while supporting your favorite podcasters. From boomerangs, yes, those boomerangs, to gun holsters. From children's books to pet food. We have just about everything, and we're just getting started. So skip the big box store and head over to the badlandsmedia.tv/shop to support Badlands Media and a Patriot business with every purchase. Thank you, Badlanders, for your continued support and patriotism. We couldn't do this without you. That's badlandsmedia.tv/shop to shop with Patriots and support Badlands Media. I went too fast.
All right. Yeah, go ahead and check that out over there at badlands.tv or badlandsmedia.tv rather. Yeah, man, what a whiff. Like when I was promoting this on Twitter, what a whiff to not point out the fact, as Brady pointed out, that this is where the term Banana Republic comes from, is United Fruit. Like I just whiffed on that. But like Banana Land, like I saw someone in the chat say this is Banana Land. It's like Banana Republic, which is a term that has been used ad nauseum by like Fox News and other, like to describe the Biden regime. Here we are. It's like it comes from United Fruit, comes from like CIA connections and what we're talking about right now. So, man, this is a big topic. So, and also we're like connecting NGOs and talking about how NGOs run things. That's just what a treasure trove of information and truth is in that, is on that thread that we're pulling on. So, let's get back to United Fruit. So, Brady, where are we now? We are at the coup of Guatemala. We've kind of dipped into the 70s and 80s a little bit, talked about the funding of militia groups to overthrow governments and how these transnational businessmen use their clout, use their resources, use their land ownership to impose themselves on the populations of foreign nations, third world countries, keep them desperate, keep them starving, keep them poor and unable to basically organize against them. And it kind of makes sense when you think about it through that lens of like why these companies, these NGOs, the CIA would have a vested interest in maintaining a kind of feudal serfdom in the form of third world countries. Like they don't want these third world countries to become prosperous first world countries, because then they can't exploit the population, slave labor, like whatever, which is why they want third world countries in South America, Central America, the Middle East, Asia, everywhere, Africa. So that's why they do it this way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the rest of the, like I said, I kind of skipped forward when I got to Chiquita. That the story's become a little more tame, because I think what we're seeing now is the governments are actually performing a lot more of the work than the corporations did, just right out in the open. Now that they have a media that's completely complicit and no longer asks questions.
Mm-hmm.
You would still have the hard questions being asked in the 80s and 90s, but these days, no, absolutely not.
Yeah.
What I think is the question I like to bring up is, obviously United Fruits didn't invent this game plan. That's been going on for centuries. I mean, this is very similar to the playbook of the British East India Company, the Dutch East India Company before that. It's what the Venetian traders used to do. They'd have their spy network in all the port cities, and that's how they could. A tiny little place like Venice was able to control, much bigger empires through the trade. And it's these it's mercantilism, which to me is another name for fascism.
Yes.
And that I touched on a couple of things. I know some of it I learned from Matt, so I know you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah. And I mean, these are like the lessons that we're running through, the exercises that we're running through. We're covering a lot of ground here in this hour, but this kind of goes back to what we've talked about with the East India Company and like the lessons that they learned in exploiting India, and how, like Brady mentioned, local politics, getting involved in local politics, subverting local politics, getting local populist leaders on your team by buying them off. And then if they don't go along with the program, you then either kill them or you just fund their rival to come in and overthrow them. And you just do that over and over and over and over again. And eventually in India, it backfired on them because they funded so many different people that those people ultimately just combined all their resources and then repelled the British Empire. So hopefully that's going to happen here around the world. And it seems like it kind of is. As far as like Nicaragua, it's interesting what's happening there right now, because you have they have like the lowest crime, like the lowest murder rate in the world now. They've gone from being like the highest murder rate with MS-13, and this president comes in and he imposes all these.
El Salvador.
I'm sorry. El Salvador. You're right. El Salvador. It's just fascinating how like now they're able to do this. They must have somehow gotten the monkey off their back. So it's great.
Well, there's also something interesting about like Daniel Ortega, who did run the Sandinistas that overthrew this guy Somoza, who is the one I was telling you was also tied to the Irgun, the whole Jabotinsky fascist network, and propped up the basically oversaw the creation of Mossad effectively in 51, which had a lot to do with Zemmour as well, which is super interesting. I've just started scratching at that, but he was overthrown as the CIA operative on site at the time, not Somoza, sorry. And so at the time, Daniel Ortega was brought in. Now, Daniel Ortega had a mess to deal with for the past like 40 years. It's amazing that he's there's a little bit of nepotism as well. That's maybe allowed him to sort of navigate through some of the stuff, but it's crazy like what this guy's had to like deal with. But right when he started making maneuvers to utilize the power of the sovereign nation state to start making foreign treaties on economic development outside of the authority of the World Bank, the IMF, and like the CIA, which is where I think Brady was like saying that it got a little tame at a certain point on the United Fruit question, because a lot of those tasks became transferred over. I mean, on the one hand, you have the CIA. We know what John Perkins was outlining in his Confessions of an Economic Hitman, going through the World Bank, the whole like army of economic hitman that were designed to use a new type of warfare that would still engage in overthrowing governments that were unwieldy, but it would be a little bit more like, covered by the accountant's pen, and getting people into debt slavery using conditionalities that really got out of hand in the 70s, 80s onward to today. So you had that type of thing that started pressing on it. You had the banks, just like back in the Levant Company days in the 16th century with Venice. It was part of like the Banco Siena that was also laundering the money that was being used by the Levant Company, which is sort of a proto-British East India Company in the Levant, in Syria, what's today's Syria, the Ottoman Empire, manufacturing and bringing in opium, because it's not like this was the drug problem is not a new thing. Drugs were still used, but it was a different variety of thing, but the same operation of using privateers, pirates, sanctioned by Venice to go around doing a lot of the dirty work, keeping organized crime syndicates in place in the Ottoman Empire, in Europe, moving that money through the banking system, controlled and centralized by Venice before it took over Britain later on. And it's the same model, but maybe more sophisticated today. And you could just see it, like when Ortega started pushing forward in 2013, building things like the Nicaraguan Canal to have like a way to bypass the U.S. controlled Panama Canal, which is already very insufficient. It's very tiny for the big shipping that goes on today in natural gas. There was going to be like $60 billion invested in this thing, with China doing most of that investing. And immediately the U.S. even admits that the NED and their regime change operations were deployed to create mass protests to overthrow Ortega and stop China. But it was all directed by the same interests that have worked hard to overthrow Trump and destroy America, who didn't want him to build infrastructure, which they've been trying to keep them backwards and feudal. And it's only now in 2021, 2022 that he was able to sort of like build back the diplomatic bridge with China, start getting some investment going once again. But there's no discussion anymore of the Nicaraguan Canal that was almost going to happen. So you got all of these interesting dynamics floating around in that zone.
That is fascinating. It's very fascinating. I want to share this real quick. This is what I was referring to earlier. This is going to be part of the Substack article that I'm writing. But I traced the moment to where the British Empire really began. The Battle of Flores, 1592. So 1588 is the Spanish Armada. That's when Spain sends a massive fleet up to England to attack England. And then most of the fleet gets destroyed in a storm. And they are able to salvage a lot of the ships. The ships that are salvaged from that attack become the ships that form the East India Company in 1600, 12 years later. But that starts the Anglo-Spanish War, which lasts about 4 years. So 1592, Sir Walter Raleigh, who a lot of people are going to recognize that name. He's one of like the explorers from the Age of Discovery. He is attacking ships down in the Azores Islands, which is off Portugal. And this major ship comes through, this major carrack named the Madre de Deus and de Due, I guess. And he takes the ship, he captures it, he brings it back to Dartmouth in England. And when it comes into the port, it blows everyone's mind. It's the largest ship anyone's ever seen in England. It's 3 times the size of the largest ship in the English fleet. This is it right here. Here's a painting of it. And as it's coming in, it's loaded down with spices, like very, very finely made jewels, jewelry, all this exotic stuff. Tons and tons of valuable, but way more valuable than the cargo were the ship logs, which detailed where every single item on the ship came from. And what they found was that it came from Japan, China, and India. And that was where the elite in London realized, oh my God, there is like massive wealth in India that we need to go exploit. And that's what started the idea of going, we're going to go form the East India Company 8 years later and start this whole thing. And so that was the moment that like the empire transitioned really from the Spanish Empire to the British Empire in terms of being the global hegemony. Fascinating stuff. Just wanted to share that anecdote.
Can I jump in and add something to that?
Yeah.
It's one of my favorite little history factoids was that trade was so lucrative, especially the exchange, because you could basically take 6 pounds of silver from England and come back with 12 pounds of silver just on the exchange. And in 1866, nice date, 1666, the British East India Company became the very first private entity in the history of the world to be given the legal right to mint coin for that exact purpose.
Wow. And that's the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve then goes on later, right?
That'd be an iteration, but it really started with a dual entry banking system out of Venice. That's where that whole banking thing. Why did the British become the dominant European empire? Many reasons, but the big one was they were 50 years ahead of the rest of Europe in terms of the ability to securitize. They had these joint stock companies, and when industrialization came around, England had a 50-year head start on everybody, and that's when they got their glory years of the 1800s. So,
well, and then there's another little thing that you pointed out that I thought was fascinating about United Fruit, where you said that they built the railroad, but the demand wasn't there. So they had to create the demand by getting into the banana business. So it's almost like to justify what they were trying to do, they then had to go into commerce and kind of develop commerce. Very similar to what was going on with the East India Company, where it was about commerce initially, getting wealthy. And then once they had acquired so much wealth, it stopped being about commerce. I think it was 1835, 1833, where they ended the East India Company's ability to engage in commerce. And it was only about raising armies and overthrowing governments in India. That's all it became about. There was no commerce anymore, no trade. It was just about overthrowing governments and raising armies. And, 40 years later, when they abolished the East India Company, they had an army twice the size of the British army, 250,000 versus 125,000. Which was and that army was then, that private army was then given to the Raj, which was like the British government that had been established to rule India. So just crazy how these endeavors aren't really about making money. It's about power, and money is just a form of power projection.
Yeah. I on that quick note too, there's the thing I was thinking about regarding the role also of McKinley within this process, because keep in mind, like, when was McKinley murdered? It was in 1901 at an Inter-American conference where he was trying to push a very different idea of the Monroe Doctrine than what Teddy Roosevelt, his vice president at the time, was pushing. And his concept was keep these imperial, European influences out of out of the Americas as a whole. And yeah, he was like, on the one hand, like favoring business, but there's this fight over like tempering or taming capitalism, taming business, utilizing the role of the nation state, so that what you build as capital, or what you engage in as capital, is also tied to lifting people out of poverty. Some moral value is also imbued within your idea of investment, and not just simply using capitalism as a cover, like the British East India Company, to rape, pillage, and destroy nations, which is ironically even kind of bad for business, because you got to like keep permanent war, permanent revolution, divide to conquer, keep people starving, which is, again, these are actually objectively bad for business. So the idea of like building the railway through the Panama Canal, or closing the Darien Gap via rail and connecting rail as a driver of building new cities, industrial corridors, which is what made America really powerful through the Transcontinental Railway. That was like what you could see, like McKinley, his former VP that died as well before Teddy Roosevelt was brought in. what was his name, Hogarth, right? Who died like a really convenient death right before. And as soon this is always the way it works, right? You get a really good guy, dies immediately. You get a shithead, or is ousted. So you have a Henry Wallace, he's ousted, and immediately you get Truman. You know, you had Hogarth, he dies really mysteriously. All of a sudden, Teddy Roosevelt, who idealizes the Confederate romanticism of the slave power. So that's his like worldview, and he loves ecology. He brings in all of these like British East India Company trained advisors to like oversee the cordoning off of the entire west coast of America from development projects that Ulysses Grant and McKinley were all trying to push for, and instead say, no. This is all going to be protected zone, no human touch. And then they start doing that as well, advancing this what becomes the basis of the modern ecology sort of imperial agenda into the other Americas as well, and starts favoring the growth of these corporate powers that are no longer bound by anything moral, but are basically now used like Brady just went through as a cover for feudalism and empire, instead of actually building up the sorts of economic sovereignty that patriots were pushing for. So that's another thing, the tempering of capitalism to become something good instead of a cover for evil. That's part of the fight.
Fascinating.
If I can give one more example to bring the whole picture home of the point where I was, came here to talk about, is big picture. It's multinational corporations have basically been able to wield their proximity to the people in DC and other nations' capitals to affect foreign policy, not for the benefit of the people of that country, but for the bottom line and for the power that goes with it. And it's, again, there's a name for it, it's fascism. I'm going to give you another early example because I think it's a fun story. If you give me 1 second.
Yeah.
There was a gentleman by the name of Robert Lansing, and I bring him up because I want to bring up the point of how incestuous these people are. They all went to the same schools. They all belong to the same secret societies. They marry among the same families. Like the DuPonts, for 150 years, DuPonts could only marry a cousin. And that's how they kept their power in the DuPont family. But it's very incestuous. Well, Lansing was the Secretary of State for the United States for Woodrow Wilson. And when Wilson was ill, Lansing was probably running the war effort. He was the son-in-law of a guy by the name of John W. Foster. John W. Foster was a Secretary of State who was in charge when the United States overthrew the Hawaiian Islands, once again for commercial purposes. John W. Foster is also who's named after him? John Foster Dulles. Yeah. In-laws again. So these connections, it is incestuous. The connections never stop. The game plan repeats itself quite often. It always rhymes. It may never be exactly alike, but it hasn't changed a whole lot. And I think we could probably come up with some more modern examples, what multinational corporations are doing this today. It's always happened with mining companies. It's not just United Fruit.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah. Yeah. And we've talked before about the concept of a holding company, which is a legal instrument that was created by Cromwell from Sullivan and Cromwell. And in the holding company, like Alphabet would be an example of a holding company, right? Alphabet owns Google. Like people think of Google being the parent company, but isn't Alphabet actually the parent company and Google was a subsidiary of Alphabet? Isn't that how it works?
Yeah, and the first iteration of the modern version of a corporation came right on the heels of Teddy Roosevelt supposedly busting the trusts. That never happened. They just reorganized and found other ways to get investor protection from basically liability protection. The first one was U.S. Steel. It was J.P. Morgan and Sullivan and Cromwell put the deal together. Same names involved in everything. And of course, U.S. Steel is another one of the robber baron. Everything that came out of the Gilded Age. I
know all about that from my professional work, where I did do research on that for a presentation that we gave as a company. And yes, J.P. Morgan, like 1903, went around and just bought up all the small steel mills all across the country. Mostly, a lot of them were in Trenton. Trenton, New Jersey, is where the steel industry was. It was J.P. Morgan that moved it to Pittsburgh, and then Pittsburgh became known as Steel City. But yes, that was because he went around and bought up all the small businesses and formed a monopoly known as U.S. Steel.
Do you guys look at any of the? I was trying to get my mind around the Rockefeller Foundation or the Rockefeller family, and like I was getting a sense that Andrew Carnegie, who became the Steel Baron, was originally like had a bit more goodwill, or like one of these like moral industrialists at the start, and then got corrupted and co-opted and basically pulled into this whole octopus. I wasn't sure if Rockefeller was always rotten at the beginning, like the first generation was rotten, or had like an honest rail development orientation and then got corrupted, or was he just already bad and was used to just gobble up all the smaller players into this? You have any idea, Brady or Gordon?
Yeah, I got some thoughts on that.
Okay.
One of the common themes of a lot of these bad actors over time is they were pirates or drug smugglers. Great example of that is the founder of Skull and Bones, was basically made their money in the opium trade. Well, John David Rockefeller's father was an opium. What do they call those guys that would go around from town to town selling elixir? Yeah, he was one of those elixir salesmen, went from town to town. Basically, he was selling opium. That's what he was doing. That's how John David Rockefeller got his start. He's the one who had the quote, "Competition is a sin." The way he made his money in the oil in the 1800s, bought out a lot of his competitors. It was great for the consumer because it kept the price of oil down. That's how he drove them out of business. But at the end of the day, he got monopolistic power. They first started floating the idea of peak oil back in the 1870s. They did that to create an artificial scarcity to drive the price back up. Rockefeller was such a, my understanding, and I get this from a James Corbett video on this called "How Big Oil Took Over the World" or whatever. James Corbett's pretty darn good researcher. I'm borrowing his information, but he talks about in that video, Rockefeller was viewed as one of the most vile people on earth, and so he got some PR people around him, and they came up with when they started doing these things called charitable donations, and they would film black and white short clips of him giving a nickel to some kid on the street to try to make his reputation better. And that's when that's when he started seeing the robber barons start their charitable foundations. And charity is great if it's done for the right reasons, but if it's done for a tax deduction and other ways, I mean, look at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. There's nothing charitable about it. They've been enriching themselves and wielding power through that like you wouldn't believe. And it's just another corporate shell to hide behind. So yeah, I think John David Rockefeller was a brilliant and brutal, absolutely cutthroat businessman. It's the children who were born with more money they could ever spend in 10 lifetimes where the Rockefellers really started wielding their power on the international stage. It was the following generations.
Interesting.
Right.
Interesting. Well, we got a few rants that we'll get into. Before we do that, I figured I'd just open up the floor for any closing thoughts. I think at some point, Brady, we're also going to probably do Iran-Contra. It probably makes sense to like really dig deep on that. We've touched on it on a few different episodes, but and that's something that I know is really your wheelhouse. And I don't know if that's what led you to really learn about United Fruit, but what are like the key bullet points, like 2 or 3 bullet points that connects United Fruit to Iran-Contra, just to get the wheels spinning in people's heads?
Give me 1 second. I've got some notes on that right in front of me, and I want to make sure I get the names right.
Okay. While you do that, well, if you have it right there, we'll wait. But otherwise, I'll start doing rants.
Yeah, go ahead and do the rants, and I'll see if I can find what I was looking for.
Okay. Yeah. So we'll close out with that, but let's do rants now. So rants. Let's see. All right, Roger 5x5, $17. The CIA or people who later founded it were also involved in supplying Ho Chi Minh with arms to rebel against the French and make North Vietnam communist. Yes, very interesting. Any comment on that, guys?
Yeah, it's one of my favorite topics. That started, the OSS was working with Chiang Kai-shek. And then when Truman pulled the plug on the arms shipment to Chiang Kai-shek, Mao Zedong drove Chiang Kai-shek off to the mainland. Chiang Kai-shek was working hand in hand with the largest opium dealers in the world, which is called the Green Gang out of China. So when Mao takes over, the Green Gang's out of business. So they shuffled everything down to the, what do we call that? The triangle now, where Afghanistan, Laos, Vietnam, and fast forward 10 years later, now we've got the descendant of the OSS, the CIA, is starting forever wars in those areas just for basically they're trying to create political cover for the drug smuggling. That's it. It's absolutely true. And it's a big part of the World War II story.
Yeah. Operation Underworld, wasn't that the CIA working with the Vatican and the Italian mafia to launder opium? Yeah.
Yeah, that's one of my favorite ones. Yeah, there's an issue. There's a problem. There's a thing there between the Sicilian mafia and the Corsican mafia. There was a struggle for power there, and the Sicilian mafia was in bed with the CIA. They started with military intelligence, when then it morphed into it. I don't know if this is little known or not, but the U.S. military transport was bringing an awful lot of those drugs into the United States.
Yeah, the Air America.
Yeah.
Also, the Flying Tigers, because a lot of the stuff comes out of the Flying Tigers operation as well.
Yeah, Helliwell.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and for those who are, I was surprised to discover this, because I was surprised that Alex Jones was such a big fan of the John Birch Society, and I had the head of the John Birch Society speaking on his show not that long ago, describing like how influential it's been on his uncle, on his upbringing, at shaping his way of looking at the world. Who the hell is John Birch? He was part of the Flying Tigers. He was part of the whole like drug running apparatus overseen by the CIA, the Green Gang, and other Freemasonic outfits in Asia that had been built up by the British Empire during the hardcore days of the Opium War, that were then inflamed and created, this whole organized crime syndicate that interfaced with the P1 Lodge of Mazzini, which was at the heart of the entire growth of the Italian mafia structure to begin with back in the 19th century. That's like the P2. We know the P2 Lodge because we've watched The Godfather Part 3 and the whole like assassination again of the Pope storyline. That's part of what the P2 Lodge was being exposed as, which was like part of Gladio, the whole like Nazi Italian fascist that used the mafia. Like, why were all these mafia operatives, Mayor Lansky, all these guys, super like McCarthyite, anti-communist? Because they were still fulfilling I'm not saying communism is good here, but the whole like picture of it that we were given is tainted by unreconstructed Nazis and fascists working with this whole thing of that Brady just outlined, that became this global shadow government after World War II. And they don't like it when their operations get shut down. And whether it was Castro kicking out United Fruit and shutting down Mayor Lansky's operations in Cuba that derailed plans in a certain way there. Again, not saying Castro's good. I'm saying he definitely derailed some major global operations, or I'm not saying Mao is good, but he definitely pissed off very powerful figures by shutting down the Green Gang and the mainland China operation of drugs that were then moved to Taiwan and Laos and Cambodia, where Chiang Kai-shek also had KMT operatives in those zones too. And on the Viet Cong, like if you read the Viet Cong, the North Vietnamese at the time, the Constitution, that what's his name? Forgetting his name. The bad guy in Vietnam that we were told is the bad guy, but it's not really. God damn it. Anyway, the Vietnamese Constitution is modeled on the U.S. Declaration of Independence. It is the U.S. Declaration of it's all men are created equal. The whole thing is word for word, because the idea was that the promises to liberate Vietnam from French colonialism that were guaranteed by FDR never manifested because FDR died. All of the patriots were purged, and then all of the traitors of the deep state took over control and basically supported the French colonialists to recapture Vietnam and then engage in taking it, over again. And we were all told, oh, it's about stopping communism from taking over the earth. That's why we're going into the Vietnam War. And that's why it's maybe okay that JFK got murdered, because, he tried to pull the U.S. out of Vietnam. So maybe it's actually for the best that he ultimately got murdered so that we could go and save the world from communism. We were lied to. There was no evidence. It was completely to reinforce the drug running cartels and crime syndicates. That's why the Vietnam War happened. That's where our loved ones came back in body bags.
Well, you make some interesting points there, because it's like this binary paradigm that we've been put in, where it's like, okay, well, if you're saying that the fascists are bad, then you must think the communists are good. Then it's like that's how they trap you, and it makes sense then that the fascists would almost promote the rise of these communist, like Bolshevik style uprisings in order to scare people and drive them into their arms. Because think about like pre-Trump, like pre-MAGA, that whole thing. Think about like people in America who were conservative, who were afraid of like this communist opiate that was being fed to the young people. What were they doing in response politically? They were running into the arms of the Koch brothers. They were running into the arms of corporate America and saying, save us, save us, save us. Y'all are pro-business. You're pro-capitalist. Please save us from the communists who are coming to get us. And that basically empowers the fascists then to just do whatever they want, with the consent of the governed.
Yeah, let me, if I can jump in and put my constitutional hat on, which is half the stuff I talk about is U.S. Constitution.
That's true.
If you really want to simplify what America and the idea of America was about, is you had two groups of people, the same factions we have today. There's one group that wants to have self-government and rule ourselves, and the other wants to have a centralized government and rule everybody else. And it's that simple. It doesn't matter if you put a Democrat, a D next to it, or an R. You either prefer big government or not. Well, the centralized government, the reason they want that is because the people closest to the government can exercise power and get more wealth for themselves. And they have to make the people willingly give up their individual liberty, to give them power. They have to constantly keep us afraid of something. They have to create a never-ending thing of crisis. That's why we get the war on terror. It's why we get the war on drugs. That's why, whatever the narrative of the day, it's why we have a climate crisis. It's why COVID had to be ultra scary. How much more power did the government seize under COVID? And that's what they do. They create a crisis.
Yeah.
And really, at the end of the day, the only reason I'm doing this stuff is to try to move us closer back to individual liberty.
Yes. Amen. All right. Let's knock out the rest of the rants. Roger, 5x5 again, $5. Presumably the same or similar clowns were involved in the post-World War II State Department opt to deny Chiang Kai-shek arms appropriated by Congress to fight Mao. That was before 50s Iran and Central America. Great rants there, Roger, 5x5. Griff Downs, $5. This is one of my favorite programs each week. Badlands offers the best of the best. Thank you. Thank you for your support. Roger, 5x5, $5. Indian leaders against British were all educated in London, or theosophists, or communists, or pro-Nazi. In other words, cabal assets. Decolonization worldwide was change of strings to new puppets. Yeah, true. There's a lot of truth to that.
One thought I just want to share on the issue of the nuance of communism and capitalism. Like we've been so charged by this narrative, this weird false binary narrative of are you a commie or are you a capitalist, right? Are you with totalitarianism and authoritarianism or freedom and democracy? It's like which pick a side, and it's like, wait a minute. Feudalism can express itself on both sides. Empire can express itself in both forms. It doesn't. It's more than either one. And I've found, like the reason why the first fascist New World Order project of eugenics, transhumanist dictatorship of an elite class of occultists ruling over a depopulated, stupidified world of feudalism. The reason why that was derailed and failed to manifest before all three of us were born, and probably most people listening were born, was primarily, it had a big thing to do with this U.S., Russia, China alliance with FDR, the Chinese leadership, which is going through their own turmoil, and Stalin in Russia. Now, the U.S. made massive sacrifices, and the productive power of America was vital at shifting the thing. But the Russians lost 27 million of their people. The Chinese lost 11 million of their people. Like they absorbed, the Russians took on something like 89% of the Wehrmacht. That's a huge amount of weight to lift. So the sacrifices in fight. And I was reading a book by Susan Butler on Roosevelt and Stalin. And for all of the problems that people might have about both guys, they really, really, really had deep state operations in both countries trying to kill them, avoiding bankers' coups, assassinations by Freemasonic outfits, like what FDR had to deal with. And Stalin had so many assassination attempts run by this Trotskyist fifth column, massive apparatus that was run by London and these fascists in Japan, and that it was interfacing with. So you had this whole thing, and both of them made the point that, look, Stalin made the point to one of his advisors who was saying, why are you trusting the capitalists? Talking about Roosevelt, why do you? Because they liked each other a lot, and that's why Roosevelt is always between Churchill and Stalin. Whenever you see the three of them, Roosevelt's always in the middle because Stalin hated Churchill so much, and vice versa. But Stalin's point was, look, we can work with there's industrial capitalists and there's feudal capitalists. We can work with the industrial capitalists, but we can't work with the feudal capitalists. And FDR was also asked at different points, like, why are you working with the communists? Aren't they our natural enemy? And he's like, look, we can work with the industrial communists. We can't work with the feudal communists. There's like this differentiation that Trotsky and this whole like, occults, Bakunin, Kropotkin, weird anarcho syndicalist like communist thing that Mazzini was promoting in the First and Second International. That whole thing, which is also big behind the Theosophists, behind a lot of the Bolshevik operations in the early 20th century in India. It's behind the India Congress Party. It contaminates so much of that. It was everywhere. It was also behind what was justifying the overthrow, the CIA and United Fruit overthrow of a lot of governments back in like 1911, 1920s, 30s, saying that, look, because they're communist, or Guatemala, he's destroying United Fruit, so he's a communist. So it's going to justify us going in and overthrowing our Benz because he's a commie trying to stop business. And it's like, wait a minute, this is oversimplifying way too much. We're allowing way too much evil by this thing, And you can see it being done again today under like, we have to stop Russia. That's why it's justified to promote Nazis in Ukraine, or, overthrow, governments around Asia for democracy to stop, because obviously these authoritarian regimes of Iran and China and Russia will take over the world. It's the same narrative we were given in the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s. Same thing.
For sure. And Trump talks like that. Trump's like, look, we should figure out how to get along with these people so we don't have a war with them. So let's figure out ways that we can trade with them, that we can get along. And it's like, that is a better world. That's how you create world peace, rather than, we don't need these countries to become, identical to America in order for us to get along with them. It's just as long as we're not subverting each other, killing each other, et cetera. And you bring up a good point that, these cabal, like these evil people, a lot of times are actually fighting each other. Like these bad people, a lot of times are actually fighting each other. It's not like one monolith that like one organization that's run the world forever. A lot of times it's different psychopaths or different sociopaths vying for power. And then, some of the people who've been presented as the worst of the worst, maybe we're just the worst and not the worst of the worst. It's like not as bad as history has painted them, depending on who's telling the history. So, because everything is gray, nothing's really black and white. And that's why it's important to defect from those paradigms so you don't get trapped by them. Next rant is Roger 5x5. $5. India didn't get a patriot leader until its second prime minister, Lal Bahadur Shastri, in 1964. He was assassinated in Tashkent, USSR, in 1966. Interesting.
Very interesting. I didn't know about that at all.
And then Crane Up 59 finishing this out. $20. Good job, gentlemen. I always learn new material from watching you too. Thank you, Crane Up. Appreciate that rant. So Brady, before we do our final thoughts on the United Fruit, just wanted to say that all of this, like I thought this was a really good moment to do this subject, like NGOs and everything, and talk about this. And this was ended up being a really, really good one, because we talked about them doing these operations and doing these nefarious activities before the CIA even existed. And then once the CIA did exist, it just was folded into it and worked hand in hand, like a hand in a glove. And right now we're seeing all of this happen over in the Middle East. They're saying it's Iran, but Brady, you and I have talked offline. I think it's Qatar. That's what, like, all of my research and my writings and stuff are going to be exposing that. The NGO super hub, I think, is Qatar, the Qatar Foundation, all this stuff. And there's a lot of proof to reinforce that. But with that said, so that's how we can kind of also connect it, not just to the Americas, but the Middle East. With that said, Brady, what are the 2 or 3 bullet points that you would say that people should leave here with, connecting United Fruit to the Iran-Contra scandal, which at some point in the near future we will probably cover?
It'll just be a way of reiterating what you and Matt just touched on, and how, who really rules the world. There's a book called Superclass I got by the name of David Rothkopf. And Rothkopf worked underneath Kissinger for a couple decades, so he probably knows what he's talking about. I don't agree with his politics, but I listened to what he said. And what he says is there's basically, the world is run by about 6,000 oligarchical families and corporations. And I've always called that a global Game of Thrones. And I think the takeaway is, we've all hit on this. What we've been told is not necessarily the truth. And what you see, you have to look at. We have to see who's the hand pulling the puppet strings, and it's always seems to be history shows it's always towards consolidated power or greed of these corporations. And sometimes they play together well, and sometimes they don't. I think it's been a long pattern leading up to like 3 or 4 times they've tried to take this fascist system and make it one globalist system. They tried with the League of Nations. They tried with the United Nations. We know they're trying with a great reset right now. I think they're failing, but it's a pattern to watch because the pattern will come back again. The multinational corporations will try to do a united fruits again. So the takeaway, and I just wanted to respond to one of the earlier chats. Someone said this is Operation Gladio. Yeah, that's a huge part of what we're talking about. Absolutely, 100%. And I talk about that. When I promote myself, I'll talk about that. Yeah, that's really the takeaway: is you learn from the past, so we have a better chance of keeping it from repeating itself.
Awesome. Well, so let's do close out here. I mentioned on Monday that I was going to be on Rug Pull Radio tomorrow night to talk about Saudi Arabia. I had a conflict, so I can't do that. So anyone who was expecting that, I will actually be on Rug Pull Radio next Thursday to talk about Saudi Arabia. So I rug pulled everyone who was thinking that I was going to be on Rug Pull, including G Money. I rug pulled him as well. That's his bit. So, Brady, where can people find you who want to check out more of your content?
Yeah, my main channel is war_hamster, just like I have it spelled here on Rumble. I would recommend anybody who doesn't know my material, check out my series called The Shadow State. I'm up to the 7th video on that. The last 2 I did, we talked about Operation Gladio, but I've hit on a lot of the subjects we did today on the Shadow State series. You can find me on Twitter at war_hamster1776. There is another war hamster who has posts a lot of stuff. He's like _warhamster. That's not me. He's got more Twitter followers. I came first. Seems like a decent guy, so I'm not gonna, I don't disagree with some of the stuff you post. But anyways, and the last place to find me is on Truth Social at war_hamster.
Awesome.
Yeah, I just say too on Saturday, this coming Saturday, Brady is going to be my guest, where we'll continue a lot of the elements of this conversation on TNT Radio's Connecting the Dots. That's TNT Radio .live at I think you're going to be on, I believe, at 1 p.m. Eastern time. So
that's what I've got written down. Yeah. Yep. Yeah. And one last one is almost every Sunday night at 8 p.m. Eastern. You can find me on Patriot Soapbox on DLive. It's a show that Gordon's come on and helped me guest host once before. So that's every Sunday at 8 p.m. Yeah.
That was a great time. Yeah, man. Awesome. Well, Brady, thank you for joining us. This was the chat loved it. This was a really, really informative discussion. We definitely want to have you back for some other subjects that are going to come up because you are obviously very knowledgeable when it comes to a lot of this stuff. So thank you for your time. Thank you for your knowledge. And anyone else have any thoughts, Matt?
Oh, I'm good. Now I think we've touched on so many things, and I really appreciate Brady coming out there and just painting some incredible imagery right now for our minds to explore, opening a lot of doors to also continue to explore as well. There's a lot of things that I hadn't been thinking about in that particular way. So great job, Brady. Thank you so much, and looking forward to future chats.
Thanks for having me on, guys. Your chat, your audience is fantastic, and I'm a fan of the show. So you've seen me pop into the show and they be part of the chat before. So it was a pleasure.
Hit the thumbs up, everyone. Thank you for watching. And have a great day. We will see you next week.